Welcome back to YouDecide2007's coverage of the federal election. In this segment, we're going to look at the environment, and I thought it would be really interesting to ask our panellists what they think are the major differences between the two major parties first. Caroline, are you keen on the environment? What do you think the big difference is?
I think two of the, well, we mentioned it last week for anyone who was watching. Nuclear, it does come back to that for me, and Kyoto, and for me almost Labor Party feels like it's just gone, hey, the Greens are pretty cool, like yeah, that's a policy that works, well why don't we take what people like about them and use that with what everyone else likes about us and we'll sort of have the package, whereas Howard is sticking to the, nuclear is important and we do need to follow that, and certainly with his line about economy that all works in as well, and I think that's the huge thing. You go into the Labor Party website, as we said, and the first thing they say is no nuclear, ratify Kyoto. That's the huge first point.
So nuclear, and you're in favour of it by the sounds of things?
No, but I see it, I'm in favour of it partially, not in favour of it as the only solution. I think that we need a balance between that and, as I said, geothermal and new technologies, but I do think that it does play a small part in our future, yes.
Dale?
Well, if I were you, I'd be pretty angry at my generation, our generation, in terms of the extent to which we've created such a huge mess, which you're going to have to actually try and solve. Your generation's going to try and solve. And I just get very angry with this notion about, yes, we'll do something as long as it doesn't harm the economy. Well, I know the person who says that is only going to be around managing this economy for another 18 months at the most, and then it's got very little to do with him. I genuinely believe that Labor understands much more that this is a generational thing, that this is for the future, that we can't hand on.
So what's the difference? Where does that manifest itself in terms of what they'll do?
It's got obvious things about it, that it's the Kyoto, it's the emissions rate, it's the targets, etc., it's the car, it's the solar systems.
But their targets, they're setting them for our kids, they're not setting them for us, they're setting them for Caroline's kids, yours and my grandchildren.
Well, that's what, it's not going to be good enough if we're going to believe some of the science that's coming out. This is a real generational issue as far as I'm concerned, and Labor's tapped into it much more successfully.
So what's the major difference between the two parties?
I think the major difference is that Kevin Rudd gets to have a photo opportunity with Al Gore, and that John Howard gets to have a photographic opportunity with George Bush. I think that's what it's about.
But a lot of people don't. There's been a huge while mainstream goes, oh, Al Gore, we love you, have our babies. A lot of people from my generation kind of goes...
Al Gore has babies.
No, but they kind of, you know what I mean?
Wow, they've really mucked the environment up in America.
If they're going to go and barrack about it, then they're going to go, we love you, Al Gore. But there is actually a bit of a backflow, and not in all circles, but in some of the circles that I talk to and hang around with. There is that's fine, but they're not just going to jump on the bandwagon, so to speak.
Yeah, I think Al Gore's probably a complete fraud. Like, he's only won an Academy Award and he's only won the Nobel Prize.
The man who used to be
but I can arguing about Academy Awards.
Yes.
Winning awards is about what's in fashion. It's not necessarily about what is the best thing to win the award. And certainly talking about Academy Awards, that's huge.
Mm. Some people would say his Nobel was really an Academy Award anyway, wouldn't they?
They would.
But in this election, we've got two major parties, but we've also got a number of minor parties, and especially in the Senate, that'll make a difference. And one of those parties calls itself the Greens, which I've always equated with the environment, and another party, the Democrats, say their policies are just as good as the Greens. So, Caroline again, what do you know about the minor parties?
Not a lot. No, in terms of the Greens policies, I think they do, the Greens policies, it's what we expect. It's save the environment. It's no logging, no whaling, no this, no that. It's about conservation. No, I'm not voting for them, and
do people of your generation actually see the Greens as being just a bunch of hippies from the 70s who are still around, like a relict community? Is that how they see the Greens?
There's almost two faces to it, and it's almost like factions. There is that side of it, and then there's the side of it that sees the Greens as being, almost sees them as being like a more environmental Labor.
A purer form of Labor.
Yeah, it's almost that too. Yeah, there are the relics, but...
Or the right wing of the Socialist Alliance.
Yeah, well, go to uni, you learn all about the Socialist Right Wing Alliance, don't you? So.
Yes, and that's just amongst the academics.
How far do you think people will think about voting Green and the second preference to Labor, because they actually want Labor to do more about...
I think they want to give them a shock as well as not win outright.
Well, I find that interesting because They've done a deal with Labor, but the Democrats haven't. And of course in Queensland, you've got a Democrat senator who's in the last spot, and the Greens are trying to knock them off. Now, if you're looking for a balance of power party, would you go with one that's done a deal with one of the major parties, or would you go with one that hasn't?
I don't think the balance of power argument's going to run. I think people have seen what's happened with Howard having control of the Senate. I think they're actually going to want to let Labor have a majority in the Senate to roll back work choices, without having to worry about negotiations with minor parties. I think people learn from the GST that minor parties can actually stuff up the purity of policy.
Well, it sounds like an even shorter term for Kevin Rudd if he gets control of the Senate, because isn't that one of Howard's problems?
Oh, I think it is.
What? But only because...
Once he got control of the Senate, the argument runs, he could do what he likes, and he did, and he's now reaping the whirlwind.
And I think it made a mockery of some of the parliamentary processes when you looked at some of the debates that weren't allowed.
Abolition of Senate committees,
all of those sorts of things. I mean, I think people really did, thinking people got very incensed about that it was a debasement of the parliamentary process.
Okay, well, from the environment to parliamentary committees to debasing the parliamentary environment, that's us on the issue of the environment.